Hi HR Nation, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today we're joined by Nigel Branca, President of Health and Productivity Solutions and Executive Vice President at LifeWorks. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Well, thank you, Chris. Glad to be here. I'm great.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you again. How have things been? First and foremost, how are you? And people will say, how are you? It's in passing now, but maybe we should say, how are you really?
Yeah, how am I really? Yeah, I think like most people, it's been a phase of adaptation and dealing with new challenges, and certainly there's been times where you've rethought the purpose of work and career and family and your own mental health and well-being. So I think like many, I'm on that journey and kind of looking ahead and thinking about what are the important things in life.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was a big wake-up call for everyone, wasn't it? Sort of looking at life and being, what really matters to me? And people looking at their why, their purpose. Is this really where I want to be spending the rest of my life? In this organization, in this location, etc. That was the big eye-opener for me. We were speaking right just before the show about travel and how so many of us before the pandemic was on a plane every other week. And I sat down with my co-founder and said, you know what? I don't think I can go back to what we did before. And we ended up having to restructure a whole organization, and not massively, but in a way that I want to live this new lifestyle and be there with my daughter and spend quality time and, not be on the road every day.
Yeah, and I would say it's not only time, if you do Myers-Briggs or something, introverts and extroverts. I'm an off-the-chart introvert, so I'm really at the low end of the introvert scale. And I think for a lot of us in that category, it's a little bit of time management, but a lot of energy management, right? Where do you put your energy? Where do you devote your energy to? You have a finite amount of energy. What matters the most?
Tell everyone a little bit more about yourself and your sort of journey to where we are today at LifeWorks.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start by talking a little bit about LifeWorks. So for those of you who don't know, LifeWorks is a world leader in providing total well-being solutions to individuals, both digital and more traditional methods. So our mantra is that if we can help people be their best possible selves, that actually leads to driving better business or societal results. In terms of my journey, I'm an actuary by background. I started in our retirement practice of all things. So I'm sort of very geeky, data-driven. And as I've progressed through the organization, I've sort of built this reputation of solving complex problems. So I ended up 3 years ago being an executive and leading the team that has our disability practice. I spent a lot of time studying what leads to people leaving the workforce, what leads to people being off work. And as part of that journey, I've led the development of really innovative digital therapy tool, Ability CBT. That's really kind of our flagship product that's had a lot of popularity coming out of COVID-19. So that's where I spend my time and a little bit about my background.
Fantastic. You mentioned it just then. What is the Ability CBT? Could you explain that for everyone a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, sure. So Ability CBT is a therapist-guided cognitive behavioral therapy program. So what that really means is, we'll talk, hopefully we'll talk a little bit about this, but there's a wide range of digital therapy solutions. So on the low end, there are things that are like kind of self-directed. You can read a book, you can do something on your own. And the high end is traditional talk therapy. You meet with a therapist for 10 one-hour sessions. What we've tried to do is really innovate to say, let's look at the type of help you can get from that traditional 10 one-hour session model and deliver it digitally where you're still working with the therapist, but instead of having to talk to a therapist for an hour at a time, it might only be 15 minutes because then you can go and do stuff on your phone on your own time. You can watch a video, you can practice breathing. And so we're really unique in the world in offering this hybrid model. So far, we've helped about 100,000 people. And the results are spectacular. Basically, we can deliver the same level of clinical efficacy for people who need, more than self-directed, more than short-term counseling, but in a way that is still clinically effective and allows them to do things at their own pace, at their own time, that fits into their lifestyle.
Yeah, and that really helps. So the first time I saw a therapist was virtually for my anxiety, and it was a big step. But a lot of the work comes after that, right? In the exercises that you do after. So yes, you have the hour-long session, but it's the follow-up and having the hybrid version and those tactical things that you can do after that really make the difference is great. I think it's a great concept and a great idea. Clearly it's working.
No, it's working well, and for sure. And I think it's and a lot of the things you might do in that 1 hour session would be, the therapist might help you, might watch you practice breathing, but in reality, you can practice breathing on your own. I mean, once someone shows you how to do it. And so the other thing with those 1 hour sessions is it tends to be in core hours when you're busy, right? So the idea of being able to do something to help yourself, like after you put the kids to bed for 15 minutes, really fits into your lifestyle. You can text your therapist, you can say, hey, I'm kind of having a problem with this, any tips? So that's really what we've tried to do, to be really innovative. And we've really been anchored in kind of our clinical roots to say, hey, at the end of the day, we still want to help people. We think we can use technology to enhance the work our therapists do, not to replace the work our therapists do. And that hybrid model has proven really effective. So, so far so good. I mean, it's interesting as we try to get adoption in different countries, some of the barriers we face and some of the questions we're asked, but that's part of crossing the chasm.
Of course. I'd love to hear more about the data from the LifeWorks Mental Health Index. Could you share more on that? Because I think that'd be really interesting for our listeners.
Yeah, so LifeWorks is a global organization. I think we have more than 7,000 employees. We help more than 24,000 client organizations. So what we started to do in 2017 was to track workplace mental health and to track it in 4 main countries. So in Canada, the United States, the UK, and Australia, which are our primary locations. So we tracked that from 2017. So from 2017 to 2019, we have a steady baseline of what mental health in the workplace looks like. And then with everything that's happened in the last 18 months with COVID, with social injustice, with an economic downturn, we've been tracking the impact on the workplace. So, some highlights, I would say, not surprisingly, workplace mental health for people in the workplace has significantly deteriorated. It's at an all-time low. And in particular, it's the portion of people that are in the higher risk categories in the workplace has really increased. And that is universal across countries. We've also done a lot of data mining to see, well, what are sort of the trends or the commonalities on people who are struggling the most. And, not surprisingly, a lot of them overlap with your relationship with your employer. So if you've seen your hours go down, or you've lost your job, or you don't have savings, you're more likely to struggle with your mental health. If you don't think your employer has a good plan for returning to office, about a third of the people in the UK would fall into that category, then you're more likely to struggle with your mental health. We see data around parents with kids under 10. So, there's a lot of macro trends, but I think what it really highlights is the lines are really blurring between an individual and the impact the workplace has on their mental health and well-being. And I think by association, maybe some of the onus on employers to support employees with their mental health and well-being.
Mm-hmm. What do you think are the biggest challenges facing employees, if you had to sort of choose 3 of the top 3 challenges that are facing employees? I know it's quite a lot, but
I'm not sure I can pick 3 challenges. I guess what I would say at an overarching level is, mental health is a topic that's not really well understood. It's not one size fits all. So what I think about with mental health is it's the interaction between the level of what you're being bombarded with and your ability to cope with what you're being bombarded with, right? It's kind of like a small seaside town with a seawall. So what's happened in the last 18 months is 2 things. Number one, we've been bombarded with way more stuff. So whether you have young kids, or you're working from home, or you've lost your job, or you have elder parents, or you can't see your family, I can go on and on. So there's a lot of stuff you've been bombarded with. So there's more stuff bombarding us. And we have removed some of the things that help us to cope. We can't visit, we can't travel to see family. There's a long period we couldn't go to the gym. We probably couldn't do some of our hobbies. So that combination of, more things to deal with and less levers to help us cope means deterioration in mental health. Beyond that, you can pick specific, sort of double click on if you're a person of color, if you have young kids, if you've lost your job, if you have elder parents, but that's it. Mental health is not one size fits all, but that dynamic of do I have to cope with more, and do I have the resiliency and the skills to know how to deal with what I'm coping with? I think that's really diverged over the last 18 months.
Yeah, it's quite a rare series of events, right? That you have all of these new stresses, but at the exact same time, we've removed all of your support mechanisms. And I think that's right.
Exactly. And I think about, if I kind of continue that analogy of, a seawall being battered by, rising tides, bad weather, I think one of the things many employers maybe overlook is even when the sea calms down, you're not back to normal. That seawall has been battered. So it actually needs to be rebuilt. And I think a lot of employers, as we think about return to office, return to the workplace, I don't think they realize that a lot of their employees are still struggling and are still operating on fumes, right? And it's going to take some intentionality to provide support to help people.
Yeah. What are the barriers then for employers in terms of supporting their employees?
Well, I think there are a number of barriers for employers. I mean, firstly, I think it requires a bit of a mindset change. So one thing I'll lead with is, I moved to Canada when I was 18 years old. So I spent most of my time growing up in the Caribbean. And as a result, I didn't really know a lot about the history of Indigenous people in Canada. So right now I'm doing this course on Indigenous people in Canada, and I'm kind of learning the history of colonization, settlement, etc. So fascinating course. I would definitely highly recommend it. But one of the things that's really stuck me is, if you kind of go back to the colonial days in Western society and capitalist societies, is, we have this deep sense of individualism, right? So we think of pull yourself up by the bootstraps, etc. And when it comes to mental health, that model doesn't serve us well, right? So the idea that an employer says, hey, I made the stuff available. It's up to the person struggling with anxiety to help themselves, doesn't actually work. And I actually think it needs a bit more of a communal mindset. So I'll give you an example. If you think about safety in the workplace, we might train our managers or our employees on first aid, on CPR. And the idea here is we're not trying to prepare them for a second career as a first responder. We're just trying to say if something happens in the workplace, there's an accident, you can help someone right away, you can stabilize, etc. We should be doing the same thing with mental health. So I'm not saying we need to train our managers and our employees to be counselors, but there's some basic stuff we can train to say, hey, Chris, you don't look like yourself. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Just so you know, our company offers this support. Like, there's some really simple things we can do. But I think one barrier is just changing our mindset a little, shifting slightly from pure individualism to a little more of a greater sense of community and recognizing that we're all connected. And then very practically, one of my favorite TV series is very Canadian. It's the Murdoch Mysteries. And there's a character in there who always says, follow the money when you're solving crimes. And so I think there's some barriers around, when we talk about Ability CBT to employers, I guess unlike a COVID vaccine, no one ever asks for more data. Like, people believe that it works, but the struggle is, okay, well, who pays for this? Like, does it belong in well-being? Does it belong in health and safety? Does it belong in HR? Does it belong in disability? And so I think there's a very fragmented approach in the workplace to thinking about employees' well-being and mental health. And I think that sometimes serves as a barrier to moving things forward, certainly when there's new innovations like some of the work we're doing. So I think employers need to, take a bit more of a communal mindset, but also rethink who owns it. And it's funny, employers know this on other topics. If we needed to cut costs by 10%, we wouldn't leave it to chance, right? We would actually have a champion, and they would work with all the business leaders, and we would make it a priority. If we needed to improve our client satisfaction scores, we'd make it a priority. But if we want to improve our workplace mental health or the mental health of our well-being of our employees, no one really, in many organizations, no one really owns it, right?
It's true. Yeah, you're right. And you've seen over the last year and a half, all of a sudden, these global head of well-being roles popping up and in organizations, because before you kind of sat with comms and bens or HR, it just kind of, no one really knew in some cases as well. And one of the surprises, actually I'd say surprises, not that surprising really, is that most organizations had some great things in place, but the employees had no idea. They had all of these different services, solutions, but people just didn't know about it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And when we talk about some of our innovative solutions, we view it as a two-pronged process. If you think about it. So number one is we have to get an employer to see how it fits into their ecosystem, see how it complements other things, who pays for it as a part of their behavioral health offering. So that's kind of the first thing. And then once you've done that, we do a lot of work to help make it available. And back to my earlier point, it's not enough to say, hey, if you build it, they will come, right? So you have to offer it, but we spend a lot of time on the tone. So we're not going to say, hey, Chris, get some therapy, like that already puts
Yes, the language as well, right? It's almost like,
it's
well,
the language.
yeah.
So we'll say stuff like, hey, you deserve to feel better. Chris, if you're not feeling yourself, it's okay. Here's something that works. And I mean, that's where I think managers, employers can add a lot, right? Because you can say, hey, I tried this program. It really helped me a lot. And totally up to you. But, help is here if you need it, right? I think there's ways to create a safe space, to create warmth. And but again, that's very different than treating it like a commodity, right? Here's the list of things that we have, as you say, and you think about the mindset, think about trying to help someone with anxiety. So I don't know, I've suffered from anxiety, you've suffered from anxiety. When you have anxiety, you're overwhelmed, you're barely getting through your day. One more decision is the last thing you're looking to make, especially something as personal as getting help with mental health. So you really have to remove the barriers, right? Whether it's cost, whether it's stigma, whether it's making it easy. And those are all thoughtful things you have to do in how you make this stuff available to, get people to help.
Yeah, or multiple options. You got too many options.
The world is going, I think every employer, I think the wave is clear, but there's still some, disagreement on, are we into digital by default? Is digital just a modality? But I think I certainly, when I look at some of our solutions, I think the world will move towards digital. To me, the only debate is at what pace, right?
Yeah.
I think we saw that with shopping, and with apologies to any retail organizations that are listening. Some of them do it well, but online shopping has just evolved so much in the last 2 years, right? I can get my size, returns are easy, I don't have to go into a store.
Personalized, right? And we need to do the same thing. Yeah.
Sorry?
It's that personalization that we have that we need to now bring into the workplace, right? We do it with our customers, but we don't do it with our employees.
We don't do it with our people, yeah. And I think what we're seeing, maybe as a good closing point on this is, there are lots of this is good for business. There are lots of good reasons for employers to think differently about their workforce, to think differently about the well-being of their workforce. But if nothing else, I think the momentum around, the Great Resign and people leaving the workforce at unprecedented rates, and the competition for talent, means that employers who are quicker to evolve will win in the talent space.
Yep, definitely. Well, now that's a question, right? The new generation coming through, when they work for an organization, they're asking about, what are some of the things you have in place to help support my mental health and well-being? That's part of them. They're part of their why, their purpose, their values. If you don't do that, and I think many companies who had that as their values that fell flat during COVID. Is like, wait a minute, you're not even being true to your values during this time, and they got found out in many ways.
And it goes pretty deep, right? To your point. We try to, the way the human brain works is we get all this stimuli and it's a lot to deal with. So we try to come up with little patterns and put it into a filing system, right? So we try to file things away, but there's a lot of overlap with, it's a complex model, right? An individual's mental health and well-being and the relationship with their employer. So if you look at, some of the statistics I would see, if you're in the U.S. and you're a Black knowledge employee, only 3% of Black knowledge employees want to return to the office because of the level of microaggressions they face. 21% of white employees want to return to the office, the workplace. So that's pretty interesting. So you kind of go, well, overall, most people want some sort of hybrid or remote arrangement, but you're 7 times more likely to feel comfortable in an office space if you're white than if you're Black in the US. So, again, that's a whole, but it just says if you want to compete with talent, you can't turn your back on entire talent segments. So does that fall under mental health per se? Probably not, but if you have a more inclusive workplace, you're probably going to have more mentally healthy employees. Another great stat I looked at is, if you have no kids, about 10% of people without children are likely or might think about changing careers, right? They might have this existential reflection on what do I want to do?
Because they don't have don't have kids that have to worry about, I suppose, some of the things that parents do.
Correct. But if you're so 10% is the baseline with no kids. If you're a male parent with kids under the age of 10, that jumps from 10 to 13. So a slight increase, it goes from 10 to 13, but still doing okay. But if you identify as female, if you're a mother and you have kids under 10, that jumps to 23%. Almost 1 in 4 women with children under 10 have left or are considering leaving the workforce. That's huge. Now, again, does that have to do specifically with mental health? There's things we can do, but this idea of like seeing the total human, seeing the total well-being, and thinking critically as an employer, these are all things that contribute if you want to, win in the talent space and support your people.
From the clients that you speak to every day and the customers, would you say that's front of mind for many of them?
Would I say what's front of mind?
What you just mentioned, is this something that the way they're thinking in terms of their approach from a talent perspective?
Yeah, I think when I talk to clients, I think it's like any other innovation or disruption. I'd say you have the top, 15%, 1 in 6 employers that are fairly progressive or have progressive leaders and thinking about this. And anytime there's an evolution, that's how it works, right? The first 1 in 6 or whatever will be the early adopters, the innovators.
And those are the ones that are working with you, more likely.
Work. Mm-hmm. Then I think there's the next level that is maybe a third or 2 out of 6 that then keep an eye on what the innovators are doing, and they're kind of ready to adopt. They just need a little push, or they need to see a little more evidence. So so that group is good. So that group, what they do is they stay close to us. They always want to know what's happening, what are other employers doing, how's that working, so that they can build a case internally. And then I think there's so I think that's kind of half of the employers, and I think there's the back half that are still in that camp of, I can't wait to get back to 2019. Like, do we really have to think about all this workplace stuff? Should I be forcing my people back to the office, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And for those, I think, we try to support, and we try to meet them where they are, but we also try to influence and share what others are doing. And again, I think that's the real, capitalism is an efficient system. So, if you need to win in talent to drive good business results, eventually, some of this stuff will have to move its way into your consciousness.
Mm-hmm. One of the challenges I keep hearing from the HR executives I speak to every day is that this marketplace is now flooded over the last 2 years. Every day, even me personally, every day I get an email from another company popping up in this space, reaching out to me about coming on the show, etc. And it's a bit of a minefield for them. And
it's very tough. What I would say is there's been a lot of investment and venture capital dollars available, and I look at the space we play in, particularly like digital mental health. What's happened in the last little while is there's a lot of organizations that maybe don't have the clinical depth or network, and they're more startups that are well funded. And the easiest thing to do there is to build, mindfulness or self-directed apps. So there's lots of those, and there's a place for them. By the way, I'm not against mindfulness apps or anything like that. But I think there's a limit to what you can achieve. And so when you have organizations like us that have maybe more clinically effective programs, it's confusing to employers because they say, well, how does that differ than what competitor ABC does?
Yeah.
Like, how does that, and you want to actually really kind of have, that's where I think you want to have a meaningful discussion and say, well, hey, listen, you've had your EAP services since the dawn of time, or you've offered these self-directed things, and yet people are still leaving the workplace. Your disability costs are still rising. Your drug costs with respect to antidepressants are still rising. You've seen an increase in suicidal ideations. Like, there's all these data points that say what we're doing is not enough. And that gets back to helping. And so I think our job is not only to build innovative solutions that provide support, but to help educate our clients on how the world is changing and how they need to rethink and maybe reprioritize their spend. But I agree with you. It is a complex landscape because you have, you're in the UK, I'm in Canada, and countries such as that with universal health systems. There's stuff offered through the universal health system. There's stuff offered through insurers and carriers. There's stuff
so complicated.
Providers. There's standalone startups. So it's a lot to navigate, right? So I kind of grew up as a consultant. And I was a big proponent. I was sort of schooled in the teachings of a guy named Andrew Sobel. But his phrase was being a trusted advisor. And so I think if you're a client, you need to figure out who are your trusted advisors. I think for a lot of clients, if you're naturally inclined and you have that curiosity and you have that capacity to navigate the landscape hey, more power to you. But for most of us, it means like phoning a friend, right? It means like finding someone that can give you some advice and help you navigate.
What questions would you recommend HR executives ask providers like yourself?
I think I would ask companies offering these solutions, like, what is your, kind of target, not so much demographic, but from a clinical effectiveness. So the way I think of the world and the way to think about mental health is there's probably 70% of us that are doing okay. And the people that are doing okay, there's lots of stuff to help the people that are doing okay. There's probably 20% in the middle that are not doing okay. And then there's probably 10% that are really, really, struggling, or actually are off work or. And so the way the mental health support system has been built is it's built really good at the ends. It's built really well to support people that are doing okay, that can do very short-term or self-directed stuff. And then, yes, if you're in crisis, the system pops into action and there's support for people in crisis. But if you're in that middle category, and that middle category has been getting bigger and bigger, you're kind of left to your own. You kind of go, I tried the light stuff, didn't work for me. I'm not in danger of harming myself or someone else. I guess I'll keep trudging along, So I think with that framing, I think employers, if they, I would think about a multi-pronged strategy to say, okay, what are the things that are offered? What are the support mechanisms in place for that 70% that's doing okay? What are the support mechanisms for the 20% that's not doing okay and need a little bit of help? And generally the cupboard tends to be bare for that segment. And then what do we do for people in the most severe of crisis, right? And so, and I think if you build your strategy thinking about your people that way, that'll take you a long way.
Yeah. I love that, because most of the time the companies I come across this, a lot of what they're doing isn't really preventative. It's just when you get to the point where you have an anxiety attack and you're in a bad place, then it kicks in. Whereas there's not many companies that are focusing on that bigger segment and focusing on preventative measures and making sure we can catch people there before it gets to that place as well. So definitely agree on that.
And I think also helping people. I mean, I've used the term clinical a few times, and again, I'm an actuary by background, so I got to work with some amazing clinical directors and therapists that have really taught me a lot about this space. But if you think about the average person, I mean, that's another question I would ask: is how does someone get the right care for the right presenting issue from a clinical perspective? So I think about most of us, and if you're not in this space, we don't know the difference between anxiety and depression. I couldn't tell you if I'm suffering from anxiety or depression. Even anxiety, I couldn't tell you if I'm suffering from general anxiety, social anxiety. Do I feel it more when I'm in a room? So I don't expect people, nor do I expect employers to be experts, but you want to have solutions that guide you through that journey. So in our case, we don't ask someone to sign up for anxiety or depression. We do a simple questionnaire. It's dynamic, depending on what you answer. That's then fed to the therapist, and then the therapist can help you with the right support. And I think that's where that's the challenge sometimes with more classic EAPs, right? I may call up to say, I'm having relationship issues. Me and my partner have been fighting a lot. And we can do a couple of sessions and we can get help on that. But if the reason we're fighting is I'm dealing with anxiety or depression or childhood trauma, that we haven't addressed the root issue, right? And so that's where you kind of need more robust support, more robust help. And I think that's a complex landscape. By the way, for those of you, if you kind of want to, sort of a layman's take on this, anxiety is more along the lines of where I'm too overwhelmed, right? There's too many thoughts, there's too much to deal with, I can't make sense of it. And so people with anxiety might do things like rewatch the same movie. So watching the same movie over and over again multiple times actually gives you a sense of control, right? Because you actually go, I know how this is going to end. So that's anxiety. Depression is more like, I can't actually face the world. I can't get out of bed. I don't want to interact, so it is a little different. But again, I don't expect people or managers or HR leaders to be experts in this space. But what you have to recognize is it's a complex space, and getting people the support they need is not one size fits all. And that's where I think we need a lot of these paradigm shifts.
Yeah, that's your point earlier. You can't just give someone an app or a resource and say, go. Just and expect.
It fixes everything.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. My worry is that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg of the effects of the last 2 years. and in the coming years we're going to see the real effects. Is that something that you're seeing in the data?
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, listen, we've been in this space for over 50 years, and so whenever there's a traumatic event, whether that's an economic downturn or some other workplace traumatic event, the effects last for at least 2 years, right? It takes, back to my seawall analogy, it takes a while for people to build back up their resiliency. We look at the last 18 months and what we've dealt with. I mean, the word unprecedented gets thrown around a lot, but I look at just the impact of COVID on people, on families, on businesses. I look at the number of people that have lost their jobs or had their livelihood of themselves or their partners impacted at the same time, and then I look at all the work around, kind of stemmed by the murder of George Floyd, around social unrest, understanding racial injustice. I mean, these are big, complex issues that people are dealing with all at the same time. So it's unrealistic to think that, hey, October 1st is going to roll around, people are going to be back in the office, and everything will be back to normal. Like, this will take time, right? Yep. So I think you're spot on. I think the lasting impacts on mental health and well-being and resiliency will last at least 18 to 24 months. And I think we're starting to see that manifest in a number of traditional KPIs around HR, right? So just the portion of people leaving the workforce, turnover, it's a hot labor market. Employees maybe finding their voice and demanding more benefits, demanding more support. I mean, I think people are demanding more of their employers, right? And again, I'm back to my point. I think the ones that can pivot a little bit and adapt will do really well. But I don't think this this strained segment of the population is going to go away anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. Well, what advice do you give to employees that may be listening that don't have a company that does support them, and they want to bring this up in a conversation? What's the best way for them to approach that?
I mean, I think I'm pretty clear on how I would go to an employer. I think the complexity is not all employers are on the same journey with how they think about their people and talent. So that's where it's nuanced, right? Because there's some employers. I mean, I guess what I would say is I would first take stock of, how does your company view mental health, talent, wellness? Like, that's a good starting point, right? And I think the answer is different if it's an HR issue versus a business issue versus not an issue. I think so. I would feel more safe the more I see the top of the house supporting it. If I'm going to my direct manager and there's very little support of the C-suite, I kind of half expect it's going to fall on deaf ears, and that's why a lot of employees don't
say anything.
Say anything, because they kind of go, what's the point? It's not going to make it any better. And if anything, I'm going to be more marginalized.
That's how I felt in my previous company, Nigel. That's why I never said anything. I was like, there's no point.
There's no point, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing, though, I would say is also, and I'm trying to give some practical tips, I would counteract, that idea of having to go it alone, right? So what you might be surprised is you might not be the only person thinking this way. And if that were the case, I mean, again, I think it's super easy if you have a supportive CHRO or chief people officer or CEO or C-suite, then you can raise it and there'll probably be that openness to learning. And it might take, to be fair to business leaders, it takes time to enact new practices, new policies, new programs. But I think if you have an opening and welcoming leadership team, they'll be more open to hearing the message. And I think if it's sort of less open, then you might see if there are others that feel the same way as you, because there might be some strength in numbers in delivering that message. So that way, it's not just Chris is being difficult and being a troublemaker. We actually have a more systemic workplace issue on our hands.
Yeah, definitely. It's a tough one, right? As you said, it's so nuanced depending on the company, where they are, etc. There's so many different things. But one thing I realized is years later, when I started talking about my anxiety, it was so many employees within those same companies reached out and was like, I was feeling the same way. So although I felt alone and it was just me, I'm the only one, actually there were so many people around me, close colleagues that were all feeling the same way. And we all had the same mindset that it must be just be us. We're alone.
Maybe if I can go back to my question. So you asked about, I think I'll blend two of your questions. You asked, what would I say as an employee? And also, kind of good thought-provoking questions to ask. So if I were an employee, one thing I would say is, the world is changing. Mental health, well-being, total well-being is becoming more important. As an organization, what are we going to be doing differently? And I think that's a safe way to say, because I think the answer is the right answer can't be nothing. I think if we're not so, and then I think then it's like, employers, it's not for me to judge them. There's a whole gambit of things employers can do, right? We could be training our managers. We could be expanding our offering, offering things like our digital CBT. We could be expanding our health plan coverage. So the answer might differ by employer, but I think if an employer is serious, you probably should be doing something different. It might be that we're promoting things that we already offer, right? So I think that's a pretty safe question to say, hey, what are we going to be doing differently going forward to better support us or to support our employees or our people?
I like that as well, because you're separating it from yourself. You're saying, what are we?
Put it back on the organization.
Yeah, putting it back on them as opposed to me as well. So that's a much safer way of saying it. I like that. That's a very great way of framing it as well. We'll use that one for everyone listening.
You're welcome. It took me a while to come up with it. But.
No, but it's right. It's again, when I was asked that question, I was like, wow. But that's a very good way of doing it as well. Given everything we've said, we've got a long way to go. As you said, we're only starting to see the effects of it now. Where do we go from here? Before I let you go, what advice would you give to all of the HR leaders listening?
Yeah, again, and we talked about operating in different countries, and I'll say that the realities are slightly different from country to country. But number one, I think the work you're doing is amazing, and I think creating oxygen for the discussion is one of the best things we can do as HR leaders, right? Like, we have to move these topics out of the shadows, and I'm not going to lie, it's uncomfortable, right? These are not fun things to look back at how we've either failed or not supported our people, and the impact that's had on them. Very tough, really tough to look in the mirror. But I think creating the oxygen to have those conversations, I think, is number one. And I think number two, looking at how you provide support with a fresh perspective is a long way to go. So whether that's some of the things that we do, like the innovative digital support tools, whether it's training your managers, whether it's how you communicate, whether it's the tone you take in talking about this, there's a lot you can do. So you need to have like any other business issue, I would say elevate it to be less of an HR people issue and more of a business issue. And you need to have a plan, and it might be a multi-year plan. So you don't have to try to do everything today, but you probably want to build a 24, 36-month plan on how you're going to evolve your organization to better support the well-being of your people.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And also, I'd say cut yourself some slack. Look after yourself first as well, because we're all guilty of not taking care of ourselves, especially HR leaders.
Managers in particular. Middle management has it the tough. That's not to be the C-suite. More senior leaders have work to do too, and the world is changing. But middle managers are kind of like that sandwich generation in the workplace, right? They support your teams, they support people.
The frontline managers.
They have to find their voice and advocate and lobby and move up the food chain. So, I think supporting that tier is critically important. And we still got a lot in our disability business. When someone goes off work, our number one priority is supporting the individual that's off work. But a really close number two priority is supporting the manager of that person, right? Because you didn't become a manager because you were an expert on supporting people who are off work or supporting them when they return to the workplace. Let's say someone goes off work because of a mental health related issue. It is a tough journey for that person, but it is also a complex journey for the manager of that person. How do I accommodate? How do I send the message? How do I to the rest of the team? How do I lay the foundation? How do I send the message to my boss, right, that this person's back but on a reduced work arrangement? They're only working 3 days a week. These are tough things, right? So I guess I'd give a thought to frontline managers and middle management for sure.
Does the same go for when the manager's off in terms of supporting their team? Because all of a sudden the manager's gone.
100%.
And vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's usually an interim manager then that doesn't know that team. So yeah, these are complex workplace issues, right? I don't want to sugarcoat it, but I think like anything worth doing, if you kind of stick with it and have a plan and execute, you'll see the results.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, Nigel, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show.
My pleasure, Chris. Thanks
You're
for
doing some
having me.
amazing work. We spoke about this before in our first conversation. Literally, the work you're doing is saving lives. So keep up the amazing work. And last thing, where can people reach out and connect with you if they want to learn more? Reach out to you personally. Where's the best place?
The best place would be anyone can reach out to me by email, nigel.branker, Branker, @lifeworks.com. And if you want to learn more about our solutions, our lifeworks.com webpage is probably the best. But no, I feel really passionately about making a difference in the workplace, both as an organization as an individual. I think, when we look back at a lot of what we'll be judged on is the legacy we've left. So if I can help